Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be upgrading the brakes on this E90 BMW. So this was a highly requested video. This is a bronze guide pin upgrade for front and rear on this 335i. Special thanks to ECS Tuning for providing this hardware at a discount. We're going to be installing it today and I'll talk a little bit about what makes it different. This is a very popular way to get some better brake feel out of your car. It comes with new guide pins and the bronze inserts. Now the reason they don't come from the factory this way is because they require more maintenance. These guide pins could potentially seize in there a lot easier given the tight tolerances versus being in rubber, because sometimes they can seize even in rubber. So it may be something to consider if you're in a northern climate, but if you notice inside here, there's O-rings and there's caps. Technically, if you were to put high temp silicone grease on the guide pins, the O-rings that go into the end of this pin and these caps will keep moisture and weather out of there, so you shouldn't have that issue with this kit based on the material choice. So I guess you could say that this is a little less prone to that, and if you are on top of maintenance every time you replace the pads, you thoroughly lubricate them, or maybe once every 6 months, you should be fine. But technically those O-rings will make it so that they're almost maintenance free. But there's a reason they don't come from the factory, because they require a little bit more upkeep. This is optional but highly recommended. It's an install kit which helps you press the bushings into place using this nut and bolt. So we'll be using this today. You could also use a C-clamp. So we'll start up at the front. I'll get the front wheel removed and we'll start the installation process. So popping off these caps, we're using a 7mm Allen. There's a factory guide pin. Here's the other one. If you notice, the upper one is shorter. Pop this off. So here you can see the factory guides. I gotta pull these boots out now. So I'd recommend a pair of vice grips. Kind of squeeze it from both sides and rotate and pull. And it'll come out. So longer one on the bottom, shorter one on top. So that bracket is aluminum, but this car lives in a southern climate, so it's perfectly clean. Regardless, though, it's recommended to put some brake grease in there to help guide the pins in place. So here's a look at the guide itself. That's where you'd be inserting the O-ring. There's a flat spot on it. So you place it in here like so. Mine just went with hand. I'm guessing that the press tool and the press fit comes into play if it's corroded just with natural age. But with no corrosion, it went in very easily. And here's the lower one. I'm orienting it so that the flat spot is toward the caliper piston. So that one has some pressure. The upper one doesn't have any resistance, but it's still a tight fit. Okay, so now in terms of this orientation, it doesn't really matter. This notch isn't really gonna interfere. It's not close, but regardless, I'm just aiming it toward the boot, trying to make it straight. Now I'm taking this part of the installation tool, putting it behind. So setting it up so that this slides over this, bring it from behind, pass it through. So it's relatively straight. So the instructions say to be careful when you fully bottom it out, not to crank on it hard because you'll deform where that O-ring is supposed to sit. Get it to the point where it stops. And like I said, this upper one doesn't really press. It seems like it's by design, but it's not gonna come out because there's a special clip that holds things in place, which I'll demonstrate. So you wanna bring this over, slide it down. As you can see, keep guiding it. That holds that one. It may seem like I'm being a little bit rough with the brake line, but they're stainless steel, so I don't have to be so careful. You're not supposed to install these O-rings until after you install the pins, obviously, so you don't destroy them. Now it's time to bring these O-rings over. So I inserted that O-ring. It was a little bit tricky. One after the other O-ring now. Okay, there we have it. There's the pins installed. O-rings are ready. We have to grease the slide pins. Let's reinsert the pads. Putting grease. You don't need a ton. Those should be tightened to 25 foot-pounds. Lastly, don't forget the caps on the back. These caps are a nice snug fit, so they're not going to go anywhere. That's the installation of the front. We'll return the spring, but this is going to be less important now that we have solid bushings. This doesn't say a whole bunch, but right now it's already dead solid, even though the pads haven't been pressed up against the rotor. So we'll go over to the other side now. I'll time lapse through that one and then we'll go to the rear. But overall, not a bad job. So this will be a steel caliper, be a little bit different. We're going to take off this anti-rattle clip. Still a 7mm back here. So I have no doubt that that looks way easy, but it's because there's no corrosion in there. So the instructions call for installation via a C-clamp. Because of this being steel, we'll see how it goes with the supplied hardware first. I would take care here, just because you can rip the boot if you were to use a socket. This doesn't feel like it's taking a lot of tension, so no big deal. This hardware is perfectly usable in my experience, with no corrosion. On this side, the orientation really matters, so you don't nick your caliper boot. You have to make sure that the relief here is facing right where the rubber is, so be conscious of that. All right, time for the O-ring. Next up, the clip. Over here, I just popped the boot forward because regardless, even if you orient the bronze bushings in the right direction, this nut would nick the rubber. That's why they recommend these on the install kit when you're going into steel or in the rear, because you'd be using a C-clamp and just pressing it into place instead of using the threads, because this is too fat. Something to keep in mind, I have stainless steel brake lines that are going to really heavily complement this modification. Okay, so we're done on this side. I'm going to go to the other side and do a time lapse. Like I mentioned before, I have stainless steel brake lines. Now we have the bronze guide pins. The pedal feel is really firm. It feels really good. I guess that's expected. Your initial maybe 10% of travel is just like it would be stock. It's comfortable. You're not really changing the feel of the brakes in any way, besides the fact that they're way more firm. So they're not more grabby, of course, because that's dependent on the pad material. But I can tell you that the firmness after about 20%, when you give it a firm press, is really aggressive. Like surprisingly so. So it's the type of mod you'll feel in day-to-day driving every day, all the time, but it's not annoying in any way. And I'm sure on the racetrack it would be awesome. But I guess the main reason to do it is if you have high mileage and those rubber boots will have deteriorated with time. I can imagine that the install is way easier on my car because it's a clean southern car, and it could be way more involved trying to get those boots out of the rear steel calipers. But all in all, I would just devote 2 or 3 hours to the job. It's really surprisingly aggressive. Not surprising, but it just feels awesome. So overall, I'm really impressed with it. Big difference. Of course, there's a lot of placebo when you first do something like this, because all of a sudden you're pressing the brakes harder just to get a feel for how things are going. But I purposely drove around before doing this with the stock bushings in there, just so I'd be ready for this test drive, and it's significant. Because the one thing that the 335i has is really decent sized brakes up front, but single piston calipers. So the only way you'll get that really firm feeling is if you don't have a lot of angle or flex on the caliper. That's where a 4-piston caliper could come in, because it's bolted solid. Alright, let's cut back to conclude this video. Alright guys, that'll conclude this video showing you how to upgrade your brake guide pins to bronze. I'll put a link in the description if you guys are interested. Again, special thanks to ECS Tuning for providing a discount on the hardware. If this is the first video you're catching on mine, please consider subscribing. I do upload regularly. Thanks for watching.